Welcome to the Fresno City College Psychology Department's video tutorial on critical thinking. I will provide you with a couple of good definitions and give you 5 questions that you can use to apply critical thinking to evaluating information. A quick Google search gave me a great definition and example of critical thinking. Critical thinking is the objective analysis and evaluation of an issue in order to form a judgment. The example provided is, professors often find it difficult to encourage critical thinking amongst their students. This actually made me laugh out loud because the example used is exactly why I'm making this video. Not only do we find it difficult to encourage critical thinking, but we also find it difficult to guide students to a deep understanding of what it means in the first place. Because of that, I'm going to provide you with a few more definitions for comparison before offering you some essential questions and providing you with a detailed example. Here are 3 more definitions. Critical thinking is deciding rationally what to and what not to believe. Critical thinking is a process which stresses an attitude of suspended judgment, incorporates logical inquiry and problem solving, and leads to an evaluative decision or action. And maybe my favorite definition, critical thinking is thinking about your thinking while you are thinking in order to make your thinking better, more clear, more accurate, or more defensible. Every now and then, I catch the John Tesh radio show, Intelligence for Your Life. John has a staff of researchers who read the latest studies on such topics as health, relationships, pets, work, and money matters. He then tells us listeners a little bit about what current research has to say on these topics. I like the show even though I do find myself saying, "Wait, what?" on quite a few occasions because of his interpretations of the research. These "what wait" moments are examples of when I use my critical thinking skills to analyze and evaluate the information provided to me on the radio show. A couple of months ago, I had one of those "wait, what" moments and made a mental note to use it as an example of critical thinking for my students. The conclusion that John Tesh reported was to respond to a spouse's bids with kindness to keep your marriage alive and well. A bid is a partner's indirect verbal request for connection. The example given was when a partner who loves birds says to the spouse, "Look at that beautiful bird outside." The partner is indirectly asking the spouse to connect with him on something that he finds important or fun. A kind response would be for the spouse to smile, look out the window, and acknowledge the beautiful bird, even if the spouse is not necessarily all that interested. It is the kind thing to do. The researchers observed lots of couples and found that the couples who were still together 6 years later were more likely to have responded to bids with kindness than the couples who did not respond to the bids with kindness. Not responding with kindness would be either ignoring the request or saying something unkind, like, "I'm trying to read," which basically conveys, "Stop bothering me with your silly bird stuff." But John stated that responding with kindness to bids caused the marriage to last. Wait, what? Let's go through the 5 questions of critical thinking to analyze and evaluate John's conclusion. What am I being asked to believe or accept? John made the claim that responding to a spouse's bid with kindness will cause a marriage to last. What evidence supports this claim? He cited a study that observed a bunch of couples and recorded their responses to bids, then found out which couples were still together 6 years later. Are there other ways these results could be explained? I wondered if couples with a healthier and happier relationship in the first place were more likely to respond to bids with kindness. In other words, I wondered if a happy relationship caused kind responses to bids, rather than the other way around, as John asserted, that kind responses caused a happy relationship. What other evidence would I need to evaluate these alternatives? Well, John suggested that couples should start practicing responding to bids with kindness to keep their marriages alive and well. So one type of evidence that I would find useful to find out if kind bid responding causes happy couples or if happy coupling causes kind bid responding is an experiment. Couples could be randomly assigned to one of two groups. One group is specifically educated about and instructed to respond to bids with kindness, and the other group is not. Then the couples could be followed over time to see if the education and instruction made a difference in the number of couples who stayed together. What are the most reasonable conclusions to make at this time? Until there is more direct evidence that the kind bid responding actually caused the increased likelihood of couples to stay happily married, the most reasonable conclusion is that there is a correlation between a happy marriage and kind bid responding, but that a cause-effect relationship is still unknown. These are not necessarily the 5 critical thinking questions. These are a set of 5 questions that I find useful. You might learn other questions or approaches in other classes. The point is to find an approach to objectively analyze and evaluate the information in order to form an educated judgment. One of the things that I notice in class that sometimes gets in the way of students mastering the class content is that they focus on learning the example rather than the concept that the example is being used to illustrate. I did not present the information about marriage and bid responding with the intent to have you learn something about marriage. I presented that information with the intent of having you learn about 5 essential questions of critical thinking. It can be a bonus to learn something from the example, but it is not the main point. I'm going to present another example. Remember to stay focused on the concept of critical thinking. Yale University has a wonderful infant cognition center where they study how babies reason and learn about the world. Some truly fascinating work has emerged from their laboratory. In 2007, Hamlin and Associates published a study called Social Evaluation by Pre-Verbal Infants. I'm going to present small parts of this study in order to provide you with the opportunity to apply our 5 critical thinking questions. I found the entire article easily for free online, and it is only 4 pages long if you wish to read the whole thing. Hamlin and Associates wanted to know if 10-month-old infants would take others' actions into account when provided the opportunity to make a choice. They used puppets to create a social situation and then gave the infants a choice between the helper toy and the hinderer toy. Let's watch a snippet of what they did, and I'll explain what you are watching. The circle is trying to get up the hill, but cannot on its own. After 2 failed attempts, the triangle enters and helps the circle to the top. The infants were shown the helper triangle over and over again until they got bored with it. In an alternative scenario, the circle again is trying to get up the hill, but cannot on its own. But this time, after 2 failed attempts, the square enters and actually pushes the circle back to the bottom. The infants were shown the hinder square over and over again until they got bored with it too. Then the infants were presented with the triangle and square and asked to choose one. 14 of the 16 infants chose the helper. At this point, you have some information about the research that allows you to stop and think critically about it. Let me remind you about the 5 critical thinking questions. What are you being asked to believe or accept? What evidence supports this claim? Are there other ways these results could be explained? What other evidence would you need to evaluate these alternatives? What are the most reasonable conclusions to make at this time? This would be a great time to pause the video and take some time to answer the questions. Feel free to go back a few seconds to review the information that I provided about the experiment. One of the ideas that you are being asked to believe is that most 10-month-old infants show a strong preference for helpers. The evidence that I presented was that 14 out of 16 infants chose the helper over the hinderer. When you got to question 3, you should have been able to generate a list of other ways to interpret the evidence as I presented it. And for question 4, you should have been able to make a list of things you need to know to resolve your reservations about the evidence. I am going to address a few of the things that you may have thought about. Maybe you wondered if handedness had something to do with it. After all, it looks like the triangle is on the right. So if they presented the triangle on the right, and most infants are right-handed, then of course they would choose the triangle more often than the square. So, the evidence that you need to rule out handedness as a possible explanation is that they alternated putting the triangle on the left and right side when offering the infants a choice. Guess what? They did that, and therefore they were able to rule out handedness as an alternative explanation for their results. Maybe you wondered if infants just prefer upward motion or pushing up over downward motion or pushing down, and these results had nothing to do with the helpful nature of the triangle and the hindering nature of the square. The researchers thought of that too. They took the helpful and hindering nature out of the equation to see what would happen. They took the eyes off of the circle to make it inanimate. When they did that, guess what? 6 of 12 10-month-old infants chose the triangle, which means the other half chose the square. Let's consider one more alternative. Maybe the parents unintentionally nudged their infants to choose the helper. The researchers thought of that too, and they made sure that the parents closed their eyes tightly before the choice was presented to their infant. You probably thought of other alternatives too. The researchers may or may not have addressed those concerns. So, what are the most reasonable conclusions to make at this time? Well, I'll leave that up to you. Keep in mind that I did not present all of their evidence. Remember to stop and think the next time you hear something on the radio, read something on Facebook or Twitter, see something on Snapchat or Instagram, or otherwise are exposed to some new information. Ask questions about the evidence. Use your critical thinking skills to form an informed opinion and make logical decisions. This concludes the Fresno City College Psychology Department's video tutorial on critical thinking. Thank you.